Greetings. This is Doc Ock coming at you live and direct today from Black Facts Headquarters Central here in beautiful Kent, Ohio on another sunshiny day. Absolutely. We are having a great day here today, and we hope you are too. And we're going to be right with you after we just get all of our stations working again. And in the meanwhile, we'll go ahead and get this party started. First and foremost, you know what we need you to do, and that is to go ahead and give us a like if you're watching on Facebook, give us a thumbs up if you're watching on YouTube, and then go ahead and spread the word far and wide to all your friends, your family, and even your enemies. Maybe you can turn them into some frenemies by letting them know about Black Facts, Educational Research Incorporated. That's us. And if you want to know more about us, go ahead and go to our website, blakfacts.org. That's where you'll find some things by me. Meanwhile, we're going to be reading today from this book right here, King of Kings. That's right. We're going to be talking about the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, conquering lion of the tribe of Judah, ruler of the 3,000, last ruler of the 3,000-year Solomonic dynasty of Ethiopia. Yes, that's who we're going to be reading about today. Realizing that, of course, with any leader, there's always controversy. And we're not really dealing with the controversy. We're just dealing with the, how do you say? The reality. We're dealing with the reality. What did the person do? When did they live? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We're just trying to tell his story because, as it turns out, his birthday was just a week ago. Yep, last week was his birthday. And so we are celebrating his birthday, the 129th birthday of Haile Selassie. And in the meanwhile, we're just trying to get all of our cameras and slideshows and different things working over here. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child, and other times I just feel frustrated because I can't get what I want when I want it. Can't get what I want when I want it. Okay, now, I don't know what happened here. I had this all set. Should have been set. Let's try it again. One more time. So last week, we were reading about His Imperial Majesty, Haile Selassie. And we left off reading from the prologue. I think this is the prologue. The prologue. And the question they asked for the prologue is, who was Haile Selassie I? Who exactly was Haile Selassie? And that is the question we are working to answer. Who was this man? And why do we continue to talk about him? And why should we remember him even, for that matter? So there's a number of reasons, and hopefully some of those reasons will be kind of pleasing. We're going to get right to that right about now as we go into our Slizzide Shizzo. Bam. And there we go. Likewise, I vividly recall my drives. This is the author speaking. He's the narrator. Likewise, I vividly recall my drives through Addis Ababa with the emperor. Each afternoon, Haile Selassie would get into one of his cars and have himself driven around the capital to see how things stood with his empire. Got to check on the empire every now and then. Every so often, he would let us children accompany him on these impromptu tours of inspection. The emperor would often take the Cadillac that President Franklin D. Roosevelt had given him. A stretched limousine with 3 rows of seats, which I was incredibly impressed by. Between the chauffeur and the passengers, there was a glass partition set in a surround made of rosewood. On a panel below the glass, fine inlay work spelt out 3 initials, H period I period M period. In other words, His Imperial Majesty. We were allowed to sit in the middle row of seats. Up front, next to the driver, was the Emperor's adjutant, while the Emperor himself sat behind us. Like the consuls in ancient Rome on his tours through the city, the Emperor took pleasure in distributing alms to beggars. Sometimes he would pass a bundle of banknotes over to us to pass out through the window, which was only opened just a crack. That was all it took, for no sooner had one poked a bill through the window than it was snatched by one of the grasping hands that appeared from every direction. As a child, I found it hard to understand. On the one hand, the Emperor was part of our extended family. My grandfather, Ras Kasahailu, was his cousin and one of his most loyal companions from childhood to old age. Yet at the same time, he was unapproachable. He was the King of Kings, Ababa Janoi, the great father of the nation, and everyone around him would bow and prostrate themselves as a sign of their great reverence for him. I, too, always found him to be surrounded by this imperial aura, except for one single occasion. This encounter took place in the 1960s in Eritrea. The Emperor had come to Asmara and taken up residence during his visit at the Viceroy's palace, my father's official seat of administration as Governor General of the then province of Eritrea. When Haile Selassie and his cousin Ras Imru came to call on us one afternoon at my father's private residence in the palace grounds, the Emperor's interest was piqued by the pool room. Evidently, he felt inclined to have a game of pool. He slapped Ras Imru, who was actually several years younger than his cousin, but looked somewhat older, on the shoulder and said, "Come on, old man, can you still remember how we used to play in Liz Yasu's house when we were boys? Let's see if you're still up to it." Ras Imru laughed, and the Emperor took off his suit jacket and handed it to my father. "Come on, Asarate, you too," Ras Imru challenged my father. His Majesty's jacket was duly passed to me, and the Emperor broke off. And the Emperor broke off. Even after just a few shots, it was apparent that Haile Selassie was markedly superior to his cousin and his kinsman, though none of us or any of our acquaintances had ever seen the Emperor with a pool cue in his hand. This was the first and only time I ever saw the Emperor in shirt sleeves. All the gravitas of his office had fallen away from him, and at this moment he was just an ordinary person enjoying a game. I stood there, rooted. Rooted to the spot, holding the Emperor's jacket in my outstretched hand. I watched, enthralled, as the Emperor potted ball after ball. After the final one, the black 8-ball had also disappeared into one of the pockets. He laid his cue aside, and I passed him his suit jacket. He slipped into it, and in a trice, he was transformed back into the Emperor of Ethiopia. At all these meetings with my great kinsman, we never talked politics. Only once did I ever get involved in a brief discussion with him about the political state of the country. During his final visit to the Federal Republic of Germany on 12 September 1973, exactly 1 year to the day before he was seized by rebel army officers and led away from his palace into captivity. In the autumn of 1973, pictures of the terrible famine that hit the Ethiopian provinces of Wollo and Tigray began to be shown around the world. In Frankfurt, where I was studying at the time, I myself had organized a benefit concert for the flying doctors who were working in Ethiopia and raised a decent sum. A large crowd had gathered on the castle square in Stuttgart, where the emperor was due to meet Hans Filbinger, the state president of Baden-Württemberg. Most of them were there to cheer Haile Selassie and wave Ethiopian flags, but a handful of protesting students from the nearby University of Hohenheim had also mingled with the crowd. They were holding up placards with slogans proclaiming, "Haile Selassie, go home and feed your starving people," and "Death to imperialism," and handing out leaflets to passers-by. The emperor and his entourage had been put up at the Montrepot Lake Palace in Ludwigsburg, just north of Stuttgart, and I was summoned to his suite there for the audience with Haile Selassie. As I entered the room, he handed me a piece of paper and commanded, "Translate this for me." It was one of the leaflets the demonstrators had been handing out. I wondered how best to extricate myself from this tricky situation and replied, "Your Majesty, wouldn't it be better to pass this over to the foreign ministry and get one of the official interpreters to translate it?" His response was instant. "So, we've sent you to Germany to study, and you can't even perform this small service for us." I answered, "If it may please your Majesty, it was my father and not you who sent me to Germany." "And are you saying he is not one of us?" Haile Selassie responded, fixing me with a steely glare combined with a fatherly smile. "Of course he is, your Majesty." I picked up the leaflet and started to translate it into Amharic. It was a confused diatribe by a self-proclaimed League Against Imperialism. I kept my eyes fixed on the flyer as I translated, making a conscious effort to keep my voice as deadpan as possible. Now and then I faltered as I groped around for the best way to render such terms as imperialist lackey or the profit of monopoly capitalism into Amharic. The emperor tried not to show any emotion, but I could sense that the words were hitting home. After I had finished translating, a painful silence filled the room. Then, out of the blue, the emperor asked me, "By the way, who told you the Ethiopians were starving?" Hello. I knew he didn't approve of my fundraising initiative, but I was determined to fight my corner. "Your Majesty," I replied cautiously, "I don't believe that I am doing anything wrong. The flying doctors perform an important role. They've already proved that in Kenya. I'm sure their aid will be good for our country as well." Haile Selassie said nothing for a moment, then continued, "Anyone can start something, but the real art lies in carrying it through to the end." His head was slightly bowed as he said this, and his dark eyes flashed. Then he looked up at me and said, "We will talk again in Addis Ababa." My audience was at an end. I bowed to him and left the room. Just a few months later, the Ethiopian Empire, which had existed for millennia, was consigned to the dustbin of history. Who was Haile Selassie? Among those who would have been best placed to answer the question were two of my closest relatives. My grandfather, Ras Kasa Hailu, was a cousin of the emperor and his closest confidant over many decades. As an imperial duke, the meaning of the title Lula Ras, and a field marshal of the Ethiopian army, Ras Kasa Hailu was one of the foremost politicians of the imperial family. In 1916, when Haile Selassie was installed as regent by the Crown Council, Ras Kasa renounced his own claim on the Ethiopian throne. My grandfather fought alongside the emperor against the Italian invaders and went into exile with him. My father, Ras Asarate Kasa, also served the imperial Ethiopian government in several capacities. He grew up in the imperial palace and during the war attended Moncton Combe School in Bath. Later, he trained as an army officer at the Soba Military Academy near Khartoum in the Sudan, a sister establishment of Sandhurst. In the spring of 1941, aged 18, he entered Ethiopia in a British uniform as part of the emperor's military contingent. After the war, Ras Asarate got to know the most far-flung and diverse provinces of his native country. Being appointed successively as Governor General of Gondar, Wolega, Arusi, Shoa, including the capital Addis Ababa, and finally Eritrea. In the final years of his life, he served as president of the Imperial Crown Council, in terms of protocol, the highest office in the Ethiopian Empire after that of King of Kings. My grandfather died in 1957 at the height of Haile Selassie's reign. My father was one of the 60 dignitaries who, in the bloody night of 23 November 1974, a few weeks after the arrest of Haile Selassie by the Derg, after the rest of Haile Selassie were executed by the Derg. He was 52 years old. Neither my grandfather nor my father had the opportunity to give a written account of their time with the emperor, despite the fact that there was so much they could have recounted. Yet at least some of the things they experienced while serving the emperor lived on in our family's fund of stories. For decades, I had entertained the idea of writing a book about my great kinsman, Haile Selassie, but I did not simply want to produce a family memoir and a hagiography. I must confess that I am deeply indebted to my father for his readiness to share his thoughts and tribulations and his visions with me, as if I was his younger brother. At an early stage of my life, a relationship between father and son that was very unusual in those days. Hitherto, there has been a paucity of wide-ranging, serious historical biographies charting the life of Haile Selassie from his earliest childhood to his final hours. There are various reasons for this. In Ethiopia, over the past 40 years, there's been little inclination to revisit the topic of the Ethiopian Empire and its last ruler. Indeed, the regime that immediately succeeded it was hell-bent on erasing every last trace of that period. So, yeah, a lot of destruction occurred after the revolution in Ethiopia. And so with that, we will close out here today, and we'll be back tonight at 9 o'clock, because this is Doc Ock at noon and 9, hoping that all of y'all are feeling really fine. We're getting ready to, I don't know what that is. What is that down there? Oh, somebody sent me a message. Okay. Well, that's an interesting one there. Never seen anything like that before. Huh. Let's see. I'm just going to click this one and see what that says. Oh. Whoops. Oh, okay. Oh, there it is. Lift Black Voices. Oh, wow. Ain't that something? Interesting. Okay, well, I appreciate you all, any of you out there that are watching, all of you out there that are watching and sending me messages or not. Thank you very much. And I see Celeste out there, and there's a name there I can't quite make out. It's too small for me to read it. But I appreciate everybody that's out there watching. Let me just put it that way. And we'd like you all to do a couple things on your way out, if you don't mind. Number one, give us a like if you're watching on Facebook. Give us a thumbs up if you're watching on the tube. Last but not least, go ahead and subscribe to the Tubular Black Facts channel. I see that some of you have been signing up. We appreciate all of your support in every way possible. We are coming up on the beginning of the month of August, and as always, that is the beginning of our fundraising for the month. We have to do monthly fundraising, so every month on the 1st, we like to put out a call to send us some more funds to share the wealth. Share the wealth. And amongst the rosters, we call this reciprocity. Okay? In other words, one hand washes the other. It takes, you can't kill lice on your head. You can't get rid of the lice on your head with just one finger. You need two, right? Working together, unity. That's what we're talking about. Cooperative, collective work and responsibility. Yeah, that's Ujima. Talking about exercising some Ujima, putting those principles of the Nguzo Saba to work on a daily basis. So, in the meanwhile, we say to you, may you go forward in peace, with justice, because anything less disgusts us. So, that's all for today. We will see you next time with a brand new rhyme. We'll be black tonight, reading more stories from Ethiopia. Peace out, y'all.